Most of you remember that when Donald Trump took office for the second time, one of the first and most despicable things that he did was issue a blanket pardon to 1,500 January 6 insurrectionists, including the violent ones who viciously attacked cops and threatened lawmakers. Well, in the middle of the night last night, Trump enacted the second part of his pardon plan by issuing a sweeping pardon to his nonviolent co-conspirators who schemed to help him overturn the election, not through violent insurrection, but through a fake elector scheme. Donald Trump again is rewarding those who try to overturn democracy to keep him in power. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, I've got a clip I want to share with you, but first we need to break down what the hell just happened. Trump pardons Rudy Giuliani and 76 others involved in scheme to overturn 2020 election. Trump was already under fire for a series of scandalous pardons. He continues to make matters worse. When Trump commuted the sentence for disgraced former Republican Representative George Santos, Trump no doubt realized the move would generate some controversy, but ultimately he didn't care. Similarly, when he pardoned Changpeng Zhao, the founder of the crypto exchange Binance, who helped finance Trump's stablecoin and put money in the Trump family's pockets, Trump should have known it would create a scandal, even though he's denied knowing anything about it. He did it anyway. In a normal political environment, this would ordinarily be about the time when a president, mindful of the circumstances, might steer clear of pardon abuses for a while. We are not, however, in a normal political environment. Last week, for example, Trump pardoned former Tennessee House Speaker Glenn Quesada and his former chief of staff, Cade Cothran, both of whom were convicted on corruption charges that involved wire fraud and attempted money laundering. It was the latest installment in an ugly series. If you're a Republican official convicted of corruption, your odds of receiving clemency from the incumbent president are roughly 100%. But just as the political world processed this abuse, Trump took another big step down the outrageous path. As NBC News reported, Donald Trump has pardoned Rudy Giuliani and scores of others accused of involvement in the effort to overturn the 2020 presidential election. Trump's pardon attorney said late Sunday. Ed Martin posted a proclamation on X, which says Giuliani and scores of others will be pardoned for alleged activities linked to the 2020 election. Martin was left replying to his own X message from May, in which he said, "No MAGA left behind." So we're going to stop right there. In other words, you try to help me either through violent insurrection or through scheming to send fake electors to try to get the House of Representatives to declare me the winner, even though I lost legitimately. It doesn't matter. If you try to help me stay in power unlawfully, I got your back, baby. That's the message Trump is sending. It's not altogether clear when the undated paperwork was signed, but this was disclosed to the public via social media over the weekend. In all, 77 people who were involved in the Republican scheme to overturn the 2020 election results and keep Trump in power, despite his defeat, received pardons, and the list features a great many familiar names. Mark Meadows, Kenneth Chesbrough, John Eastman, Sidney Powell, Boris Epstein, et al. A Politico report noted that, quote, Giuliani, Eastman, and Powell were among those identified by former special counsel Jack Smith as Trump's co-conspirators, though he never brought charges against them. They were what we call unindicted co-conspirators. Quote, I, Donald J. Trump, do hereby grant a full, complete, and unconditional pardon to all United States citizens for conduct related to the advice, creation, organization, execution, submission, support, voting, activities in, or advocacy for or of any slate of presidential electors in connection with the 2020 presidential election, the proclamation said. The pardon also referred to, quote, any conduct relating to their effort to expose voting fraud in the 2020 race, despite Team Trump's failure to actually find any meaningful examples of voter fraud in the 2020 race. As a practical matter, the pardons are largely symbolic. Of the 77 beneficiaries in the batch of pardons, none is facing federal criminal charges related to the scheme to overturn Trump's defeat. Trump, in other words, came to the aid of those already in the clear, at least as far as federal law enforcement is concerned. So why bother? By all appearances, this is the latest in a series of moves, intended to deliver a political message from the White House to the nation. Those who stand with Trump and assist in his schemes need not worry about federal legal consequences. In his first term, Trump effectively wielded his pardon and commutation power as a corrupt weapon, rewarding loyalists, completing cover-ups, undermining federal law enforcement, and doling out favors to the politically connected, resulting in some of the most controversial pardons in American history. Many of these actions, however, transpired after his 2020 election defeat, when it seemed as if his political career was over and he no longer had to concern himself with consequences. But in the first year of his second term, it appears Trump is no longer concerned about appearances or the pretense of propriety. He's corrupting the process. He seems to know he's corrupting the process. He must know we know he's corrupting the process, and he's doing it anyway. On the first day of his second term, Trump issued roughly 1,500 pardons and commuted the sentences of 14 January 6 criminals, including violent felons who were in prison for assaulting police officers. A few days later, he kept going, pardoning 23 anti-abortion rights activists, seemingly unconcerned about their guilt. That was soon followed by a pardon for former Governor Rob Blagojevich, a man synonymous with corruption in Illinois politics, whom Trump saw as an ally. In early March, he pardoned a Tennessee Republican who was just 2 weeks into a 21-month sentence for his role in a campaign finance fraud scheme. In late March, he pardoned a prominent campaign donor. Asked to defend the latter, Trump struggled in unintentionally hilarious ways. A month later, he pardoned another Republican donor, as well as a Trump-aligned former Las Vegas city council member. In the weeks and months that followed, the list just kept growing. Traditionally, presidents have issued pardons and commutations to right a wrong or to protect those who have been falsely accused of wrongdoing. In 2025, if Trump sees someone as an ally, that's apparently all he needs to know. For all the GOP hysterics about the Biden era about a two-tiered system of justice, the White House has gone out of its way to create a very dynamic that Republicans claim to be against. So with that in mind, I want to play a clip which features CNN legal analyst Ellie Honig. And Ellie Honig, I've mentioned before, is somebody who has actually defended Trump on multiple occasions, multiple prosecutions against Trump. For example, the Manhattan prosecutions against Trump that secured 34 felony convictions. Ellie Honig actually defended Trump in that. Okay, so he's like not some raging liberal who hates Trump, but it'd be interesting to hear what he has to say about this.
All right, breaking this morning, President Trump rewarding the loyalty of some of his staunchest allies by pardoning them for their alleged efforts to overturn the legitimate results of the 2020 presidential election. The Justice Department's pardon attorney posted the long list of names overnight, which includes Trump lawyers Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell and the president's former chief of staff, Mark Meadows. CNN senior legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Ellie Honig is with us this morning. Finally, I'm complaining. I haven't seen you in too long. But for now, some of these people that he's pardoning have faced state charges, not federal charges. What is the practical implication of all this?
Right, Sarah. So this is a presidential pardon, so it only impacts federal criminal cases. So as you said, several of these people are currently being prosecuted at the state level relating to the fake elector scheme in Wisconsin, Michigan, Nevada, Georgia, and Arizona. So the pardons have no impact on those state prosecutions. Now, it's worth noting those state prosecutions are largely in the process of collapsing or have collapsed in their own right, but the pardon has no impact. Also, pardon has no impact on any civil lawsuit. So, for example, Rudy Giuliani has been found liable for millions of dollars in defamation for statements that he made against Georgia election workers. That verdict, that liability is completely unimpacted, no impact by this pardon. The only thing it could impact is federal criminal cases. None of these people have been charged federally with any crimes. It's, I think, very unlikely they would have been charged during the rest of Pam Bondi's term as Attorney General. And even if they were to be charged by a hypothetical next DOJ, that would be in 2029, way beyond the statute of limitations. So in that respect, Sarah, I think they're largely symbolic.
Yeah, at least one person was trying to get their case moved to federal courts, but that didn't happen. So that's good information, Ellie. Can you talk about the larger trend that seems to be happening here when it comes to the DOJ and what happened on January 6th?
Well, I think there's an unmistakable trend here to rewrite and sanitize January 6th. It's been going on since day one of the Trump administration. First, let's remember we had pardons of 1,500 plus people who were at the riot on January 6th. Then we had firings of dozens of career prosecutors and law enforcement agents who were simply doing their job in prosecuting those cases. Then a week or two ago, we saw 2 veteran DOJ prosecutors suspended because they happened to reference January 6th as a mob and as a riot. And now we have this. And if you look at the preamble to this pardon, it specifically says, essentially, this is intended to make people think differently and look differently back at January 6th. So I don't think there's any way to ignore that trend.
Seems to be the case. Again, as I said, like these are largely symbolic, but it is incredibly disgusting. And I think the greater threat here, or the greater takeaway is, in addition to the broader effort to sanitize and reward those who tried to help Trump remain in power unlawfully, the reminder that Trump's Justice Department will never, ever bring federal charges, even if they were possible, against anybody who tried to keep Trump in power unlawfully. And by the time that another Democratic attorney general might be in a position to do this, they really won't be, because, as Ellie Honig notes, the statute of limitations will have expired, precluding any sort of prosecution in the future. So, folks, It seems, as is the case, Trump's attempts to steal the 2020 election and his January 6th insurrection will largely go unpunished as far as American history is concerned. It's a real stain and a disgrace on the system of this country. I will note before we close out here that Brazil, 2 years after Trump's January 6th insurrection on January 8th, 2023, they had their own version of January 6th in which Jair Bolsonaro, who was dubbed the Trump of the Tropics, his supporters stormed the Capitol in Brazil, Brasilia, and attacked the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judiciary to try to return Bolsonaro to power. It failed, and there were sweeping, crushing, immediate consequences for this coup, this insurrection attempt, and ultimately Bolsonaro was successfully prosecuted and convicted of attempting to stage a coup. Not just prosecuted, but convicted. And so it just demonstrates how, in this particular instance, Brazil's system of government is vastly superior with respect to holding, insurrectionist, leaders accountable in ways that ours simply failed. And we should remark it as a failure. We should regard it as a failure, and we should work aggressively once we have power to change the system to prevent such a thing from ever happening again. In the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.